Well, good morning. Welcome to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprise. You may be seeing it every week, but we don't get to always do it every week because we get together and do several shows at a time. So where have you been? I just flew in from the Philippines. What have you done since we were together last?
Well, just at Campus Hill Church, we have new leadership there.
New pastor is there?
Yeah.
Mark Etchell is here?
Susie Etchell.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
You're happy?
Yes.
Church is happy?
Church is happy. We had a good foundation laid the past season, and we are building it up.
Good. Any news from you the last few months?
I just got back from Pine Springs Ranch from a pastoral retreat, so...
Oh, I missed that, I'm afraid. Yes. Good for you.
Yes.
Good place.
Oh, and
This is the journey
yeah,
that we're
journey
part of.
retreat,
Yeah.
I also turned 1 year in my church at Calamasa.
You keep track of that?
It was a celebration.
We haven't had time to get bored with you yet.
True.
She preached this last Sabbath, and people spoke about this great passion.
Yes.
That's what we know about Viana, is that she's quiet until she speaks. When she speaks, there's great passion. We like that.
Thanks, John.
How about you, John? Anything special in the last 2-3 months?
Well, been to Spain, Georgia, and Albuquerque. The fun part of that is we got to get up to Taos Pueblo, which is the oldest continuously inhabited town in North America.
Wow.
It was built 500 years before the Spanish came, so it goes back 1,000 years. So it's kind of neat to see structures that go back 1,000 years in North America.
What were you doing you're at the Ministries Convention?
There was a committee meeting that was meeting on the Sunday, so we came in early and did that little side trip I'd always wanted to do to see what that was like. And Native Americans live there now, go through all their routines and explain them to visitors who come. So it's a good thing.
That's not the one where the houses up on the side of the cliff.
No, those are not inhabited.
Okay.
Those were similar period, roughly about 1,000 after Christ. But those were abandoned before Westerners came.
Okay.
But Taos was capital of a Native American nation when the Spanish came, and they actually at one point drove the Spanish down into Mexico for a few decades. So they were quite cohesive and quite civilized.
Wow. Okay. Ready?
Ready.
So we're going to do the fourth trumpet. If you have a Bible with you, we'd like to just catch you up with us. And we'll get back in the groove of interpreting the 7 trumpets. So we're in Revelation chapter 8. And we've been doing these different ones with wormwood and third. These are all thirds after the seals were 1/4. Now we have 1/3, and we have more 1/3s here today. Verse 12 in chapter 8. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and 1/3 of the sun was struck, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars, so that 1/3 of them turned dark. 1/3 of the day was without light, and also 1/3 of the night. So who's going to tell us what this means?
I guess the first question is, what do we think it means? What thoughts come to your mind when you read a text like that?
It's obviously tied to the 4th day of creation.
Right, that's what I thought.
Okay, so we can explore that. What makes you think that, though?
Sun, moon, and stars.
So putting those 3 together is a mental trigger, and I would assume the ancients probably would have thought that as well. Do you think of any other Old Testament background? Sun, moon, and stars are darkened.
Joel 2.
Joel 2.
That's good.
That's especially important for the 5th trumpet. Yeah, I don't know that there's specific clues to Joel here, but definitely are in the next one. Exodus, you have a plague of darkness in the Exodus. So, all right. Well, why don't we?
What do you think it means when it says 1/3 of the time was dark? Does that mean 1/3 of the territory, 1/3 of the time?
Well, that's the interesting piece here. The text itself goes both ways. So what do you do with this? All right. The fourth angel blew his trumpet. I'll go with the ESV this time. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was darkened. Okay? And a third of the moon, and a third of the stars. So when I read that, I would say the sun is like 1/3 dark and 2/3 light.
Yeah.
So if you think of a pie or something like that. The moon is 1/3 darkened, and a third of the stars. So maybe a third of the stars disappear from the sky. But then it says, so that a third of their light might be darkened. So that sounds like, no, it's not a third of the sun is darkened, as the sun is dimmer than it was. So that a third of their light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining. Ooh. So is it all dark for a third of the time? Or is it dim by 33%? Likewise, a third of the night.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So you see, on the one hand, it sounds like they're dimmer than they were, and on the other hand, it sounds like a partial, like an eclipse. It's dark for a time, and then the rest of it is light. So generally, I think scholars think of this as describing an eclipse, that these heavenly bodies are somehow eclipsed, at least for a time.
And I think that makes sense, because I see a sequence of effect here when it comes to light being struck or dim. I just preached on day 4 of creation this past Sabbath, and thought that the connection between the sun and the moon was pretty awesome. So day 4 creation, a smaller light to govern the night and a bigger light to govern the day, right? But we know scientifically that the moon is not a light inherently of its own. The moon is a source of light because it reflects the sunlight. So because it's connected to the sun, it becomes a light, kind of like, we inherently cannot actually have righteousness, but if we're connected to the righteousness of Christ, then we can reflect that. And I think here there's a sequence of effect, because it starts with the sun. A third of the sun was struck, which affects the moon, and the same thing with the day and then the night. So when the sun is affected, right, when the light of the sun is affected, then it affects everything else. I don't know. What do you think, Viana?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a trickle down from bigger to smaller.
Now, I'm not sure about the stars and a third of the stars. It just seems like everything has dimmed universally.
But then it says a third of them might be darkened, and that the day might not shine for a third of it. So are they darkened a third of the time? Which would be like 1/9, right? When you're dealing with the trumpets, you're dealing with some of the toughest material in the New Testament. I would say maybe 2 Thessalonians 2, maybe Revelation 17, 7-11, 5th trumpet, 4th trumpet. These are some of the toughest passages in the Bible.
I think it's important to review what a third means,
More than 1/4.
Less than 1/2.
Yeah,
Actually, yeah.
Well, I think an important piece of the thirds is that Satan's kingdom seems to be in thirds. And we can go to Revelation 16 and verse 19. Great question. It says, the great city was divided into 3 parts. I'm reading the King James here this time. The great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So you have here that Babylon is made up of 3 parts. So that leads me to think that this thirds would be portions of Satan's kingdom. We're dealing with judgments, okay? I think we've concluded that from our many sessions on the trumpets in the past, that the trumpets are judgments on those who have hurt God's people. So the trumpets are targeting different aspects of Satan's kingdom in how they've related to the people of God.
Can I have a quick comment here?
Yeah.
I thought of how, the Godhead is 3 in 1. So there's 3, but it's united, versus in Revelation 19, it's 3 but divided. So, kind of like a reversing. Same thing in Revelation 8:12, it's a reversing of day 4. Creation gives light, and here we're losing light.
Yeah.
So could be.
So a reversal of creation, I think, is a theme throughout the trumpets, and this is one of the
Right.
clearest ones. So that's an excellent observation.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So then the question comes: do we read this literally or spiritually?
Yes.
And I'm not sure the allusions are all that helpful. Okay. So let's take a look at them. Genesis 1:14-16. And while we're going there, Dan, I think you've been inclined in the past to sort of take these trumpets literally. How would you read the fourth trumpet in sort of a future literal approach? What's going on there?
That's my default is eclipses and whatever else. That these are an escalation. That the seals are 1/4, and now God is letting go, and nature is devolving backwards, and now it's 1/3, and just more darkness begins to go, and then under the plagues it's darkness.
Well, I got to see a total eclipse, a little while ago in Kansas, and it's pretty spooky stuff. You're right out there in the middle of the day. It was around 1 in the afternoon, and all of a sudden, the only light that was there was at the horizon. It was pitch dark overhead, and at the horizons, you could see a glow all the way around. I mean, that's like no experience. Sunrise, sunset, the glow was one way or the other, but here it was all around.
I was with a group of Africans a lot last week, and we talked about going to the game park in a place called Pilanesberg outside Johannesburg. And I can remember being in the middle of the night with Sam Lenore and Stuart and all of our staff there at La Sierra. And there's no moon, there's nothing, there's no street lights. I'm in the middle of nowhere, and the truck died. And then he's, trying to get it started again. And I thought, exactly how do we get back to our lodge from here, in the dark, with no moon, no light, no nothing.
1 foot.
And darkness, it just felt really, really dark. And then all of a sudden, it started. I said, okay, thank you very much. What do you do when there's lions and snakes and rhinos and whatever else between you and where home is? And it just reminds you how big deal light is. And when all of a sudden there's light, and here we're taking all light away.
Well, if you take this literally, you've got an eclipse that lasts for 1/3 of the day. I mean, that would be really freaky.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, scientifically, it probably wouldn't be an eclipse, right? Because the mechanisms for eclipses don't function that way. So we have to hold open at least the possibility that this is figurative. To take it totally literally doesn't quite work for me, at least, because it just seems to be saying something more than just something we're familiar with.
Yeah.
Now, if it said there's going to be eclipses, one after another, 25 a day or something, that would be another amazing kind of a thing. But again, how would that function? So let's take a look at these allusions and see if we learned anything. So somebody got Genesis 1:14-16?
Yeah, I got it. It says from the NRSV, "And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars."
Okay. So what does that tell us about the fourth trumpet? Not much, right?
Not yet.
Allusions don't always help. They're a good place to start, but they don't always help. In the third trumpet, we noticed that. We looked at some allusions and kind of like, okay, but, that didn't help too much. Clearly, the trumpet is grounded in creation, some sort of reversal of creation. But how to interpret the fourth trumpet?
We need more.
Yeah.
Unless you guys are seeing something I don't.
So is it stronger to go to the plague as
Well,
the
let's
root?
go to the Egyptian plague
Yeah.
and see what help that might be. So Exodus 10, 21 to 23. And this is the thing I like about the trumpets, because you almost have to do an inductive study.
Yeah.
You have to just
True.
go item by item and try to piece it together, because if you don't, you're left kind of clueless anyway. So who has Exodus 10, 21 to 23?
I have it. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness will spread over Egypt, darkness that can be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or leave his place for 3 days. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived.
Well, there's a piece maybe that's helpful here. There was a time when there was literal darkness for the Egyptians, but God's people had light.
So question. How do you get literal darkness scientifically here if we're saying that you can't get literal darkness for a third of the day in
Well,
Revelation?
how long did this go?
Okay,
3 days.
3 days. So how does that happen?
So this must not be an eclipse.
There must be a foreign
So either God's
thing
intervening
introduced. Yeah, some
or
intervention.
doing something.
We do have an example of this in the year 1780. There
Right.
was a dark day,
Right.
and it lasted for hours.
That's a good one.
Now, historically, we know that in Western Canada there was a massive forest fire. Now, they didn't know, those who experienced the dark day had no idea, but apparently there was a massive forest fire in Western Canada, and the prevailing wind brought that smoke over New England. This dark day wasn't everywhere, but it was just over New England, so it's presumed at least that it was caused by this forest fire coming over. So it is possible to have a natural explanation for darkness, even for 3 days, perhaps. Was there a forest fire in Tunisia or something?
And somehow drifted over the Egyptians and not Goshen.
Well, then that's, yeah. What do you do with that? See? Yeah. So I think the point that might be take home here is the idea that this darkness and the trumpets could be just for the opponents of God.
Right.
And his people are not affected by this. And I think there's other evidence that that's the case. So,
Is that the
so
1/3?
that kind of fits.
The 1/3.
Is that
Yeah.
the 1/3?
Well, that the thirds are being affected. A third of the earth, third of the stars, third of the waters that are being affected by the trumpets. And that would seem to be portions of Satan's kingdom. So, but there's really not a lot of help here, I don't think.
Well, my notes here in the study Bible says that the link is to help the God's people escape. So is there a parallel to that? Their lead saying, is there a way that the trumpet is now setting up the situation for the spiritual Israel to be taken away to the
wow.
promised land?
Where do you get that from? That's very interesting. That the
Well, that's what the
third.
plagues were, setting
I
up a context
see.
for Israel to leave.
I
So
see.
is there a parallel to the second coming?
Okay.
Well, in the
Got it,
trumpets,
thank
you
you.
have what some
That's interesting.
scholars have called the Exodus from Egypt, fall of Babylon motif. That several trumpets are grounded in Egypt, and that may be the key here. This trumpet is grounded in Egypt, no questions about it. And the darkness of the fifth trumpet would also then be grounded in Egypt, and that'll become important for understanding the fifth trumpet later on. But still, I'm not sure that this illusion helps us all that much. It's just there's a period in history where something like this happened. One other allusion is Ezekiel 32, verses 7 and 8. Ezekiel 32 and verses 7 and 8.
I can read that.
Yeah.
When I destroy you, I will cover the sky and blot out the stars. The sun will hide behind the clouds. This is good. And the moon will give no light. I will put out all the lights of heaven and plunge your world into darkness. I, the sovereign Lord, have spoken.
All right.
That sounds
Ezekiel
closer.
32 is a judgment on Egypt. So that kind of fits here again. It's a judgment on Egypt. But is this going to be literal? You know, is this going to be a literal judgment? I mean, often God said to Babylon, I will destroy you. And when the prophecy is fulfilled, did God destroy the Babylonians? No, Cyrus the Persian came.
No.
And then God said to Judah, you know, I will destroy you. But it was the Babylonians who did it. You see, so when you look at fulfilled prophecy, you realize that some of this judgment language is figurative in a way.
That's good.
So that to me is a piece of it, but I don't think, you know, Dan's going to be satisfied with that by itself. So we do have to go deeper.
Okay.
But one thing you could suggest here, you know, is God saying that when the Egyptians come under judgment, is it all going to be heavenly signs and stuff like that? Day of the Lord is always, you know, darkness and stars and all this kind of stuff. So it's day of the Lord language in the Old Testament. It's a symbol of God's judgment.
About the cross when the darkness came over the
I was thinking
Calvary.
about that too.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And
So-
a comment on the language of judgment. You know, I do appreciate your thoughts that you shared, because here, you know, this is first person. I will destroy when I destroy you, right?
Yep.
I will do this, I will do that, I will do that. But then when you look at fulfilled prophecy, it was the Babylonians. So almost as if you put the two pieces together, it's the consequences of that really destroy us.
I think one way we would look at that spiritually is the idea that we live because God protects us. And if we say to God, no way do I want your protection, then God is no longer protecting, and then bad things happen. I like to put it this way in terms of the Exodus. Moses said to Pharaoh, let my people go. Pharaoh said, over my dead body. God said, have it your way.
That's the Pauline translation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I like
That's
that
true.
one.
You see, so God often takes responsibility for these things. When you actually look at the fulfillment, you realize there are lots of other things in play. And that those who have rejected God are forced to deal with the consequences.
Exodus
of not
15,
having
where he
his
says,
protection.
Yeah.
Exodus 15, where he says the horse and rider has been hurled into the sea, and they just let the waters go and they drown. But
Yeah.
it says they hurled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea of casting down is there, but literally that's not what happened. Yeah. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. With the third and fourth trumpets, these allusions don't really do it. They were more helpful for the first and second trumpets, where you had allusions to the Exodus, to Ezekiel, and to Jeremiah. And those were very, very helpful. But here's not so helpful. So the next thing you go is to allusions. I mean, not allusions, to echoes. Echoes of language. In other words, where is this language used in the Old Testament?
Okay.
The author's not pointing you to a particular text, but can we get a sense of this language? How is it used? And I looked into darkness, and darkness, of course, goes back to creation, the very second verse of the Bible. Darkness was over the
deep
face
waters.
of the deep. So before creation, when everything was a mess,
Yes.
there was darkness. And I
Well.
think that was literal darkness.
Come on.
Okay. In Deuteronomy, though, darkness is a curse of the covenant. If you disobey me, then there'll be darkness at noonday and things like that. Did that actually happen? There's no biblical evidence that that actually happened. So maybe that's figurative language there. Just maybe.
Well, all the way through the Bible, spiritually going away from God puts you in
Yeah.
darkness.
But it's a covenant curse. You know, you disobey the covenant, and darkness is one of the things that will come upon
Yeah.
you. Psalm 69 is one I want to point your attention to.
Okay.
Because darkness can be a symbol of punishment for sin. It can be a symbol of the upheavals in the world that will lead to God's new creation. And as you go into the intertestamental period, when you go past the Old Testament, before the New Testament, light and darkness become symbols for the battle between good and evil. It's no longer literal light and darkness, but it's a battle between good and evil. And Psalm 69 actually seems to be a foretaste of that thing. Notice what it says, Psalm 69:23, let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and make their loins tremble continually. So the darkness there is not literal darkness, but it's a darkness of vision.
Yeah.
It's a darkness, and this is how the New Testament tends to take it. The New Testament takes these things very figuratively. Jesus brings light to the man who was born blind, in John chapter 9. So the light is, yes, literally he sees now, but in John 9 it's more than that. It's spiritual light that he has seen.
2 Corinthians 4, the God of this world has blinded the minds of men.
John chapter 1, the whole creation is described in spiritual terms.
Yes.
And that Jesus is created, he came, the Word was created flesh, is the language used.
Just to keep us in mind, we've got a couple of minutes, John.
Yeah, so the point is that when you look at the image of darkness in the Old Testament, it tends to be literal most of the time, but there are hints, like in Deuteronomy, that maybe there's more at stake. When you get between the Testaments, definitely this language is used in a spiritual, symbolic way, and in the New Testament, very much so. So there's at least a possibility that there might be a figurative meaning for this fourth trumpet, and we'll want to look at some other evidence for that as we get a little closer. Is this making any sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it making sense to you, Dan?
Yes, I want to hear you tie it all together.
Okay.
And go.
Yeah. But I mean, taking the trumpets in a future sense, if it were figurative, would that be a problem for you? Does it have to be literal?
I'm a both-and person, so
Good answer.
I take all of it.
Okay, so you're going to take all of this in, and it's all going to work.
He wants you to wrap it up on how it can work.
Yeah, no. I believe it spiritually, and I believe at the end there will be nature falling apart, mountains and islands moving, and darkness coming back over the world the way it was at Genesis. The mechanisms to get there, I am not so clear.
Okay, very good. So when we get back together, we'll look a little further into this fourth.
So spiritual darkness, literal darkness, there's the question, or some combination of the two. Anyway, we hope you're enjoying studying. Have your Bible with us for the next show, and we'll continue to flip back and forth until we begin to get some light on the subject. Thank you for joining us with GPS. We're thrilled to have you with us. God bless you. God's prophetic surprise. See you next week.